Okay.
So, welcome.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here at this vlog number 2
Okay.
on the Forum for Leadership and Governance series, which is
Okay.
a vlog and podcast series that I will be hosting.
Okay.
My name is Geoffrey Mujisha,
Okay.
and I would like to thank you so much for accepting to participate,
You're
to
welcome.
share your valued views on issues regarding leadership in Africa.
Okay.
Going straight into it, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Okay. So my name is Isiansa. I come from Ghana, and I wear three main hats. One, I have an HR firm, and I do consulting, recruitment, corporate training, and I've done this for the last 11 years, and this is with Access Human Capital. That's the name. Secondly, I teach at a liberal arts university in Ghana. It's called Ashesi University. And I used to teach a wider variety of classes, including HR, organizational behavior, negotiation, African comparative politics, and then leadership. But for the last 5 years, my focus has really been leadership. That's what I teach. We have a module where I teach servant leadership. That's the focus. And then the third hat that I wear is I have a social enterprise, and that works with senior citizens. So we target people over 60, and we engage them in programs and advocacy, and it's a membership-based association, so we try to use our membership numbers to push for discounts for people over 60. Transportation, retail, healthcare, however we can make life easier for them, in terms of bearing the cost of services. So those are the three main things that I do.
Thank you very much for the work that you do. We'll stick with the leadership hat and go straight into it. So what's your view on leadership and governance in African communities, in African civil society, and African governments in general?
That's a tough question, but my attempt to answer it is to look at leadership in our context as leadership that is in flux, right? And I say it's in flux because you're looking at communities, governments, institutions where you have people who are used to a certain style of leadership, a certain orientation towards leadership, where the leader has the final word, and the leader makes all the decisions, and the leader doesn't engage other people, and the leader basically charts the course, and everybody else has to, just comply and then follow. On the other hand, we also have a certain generation and a certain shift towards leadership that is fresh, engaging, empowering, leadership that actually focuses on bringing in more voices. It's more inclusive. Right. And we're on a continent and in a context where that's in flux. So you'll find a nation that talks about youth, and we're going to, so politicians, they'll come up and talk about youth employment, youth engagement, but the people talking to you are in their 70s. Their leadership style is old.
Right.
And they're looking to engage younger people. There's a gap there. You have a leadership style that is very relatively authoritarian, and the leader has a final word. And at the same time, in the same context, you find young, innovative leaders, who are rising, but they are, in a context where they have to deal with a certain generation of leaders or a certain style of leadership that focuses mainly on one path, one way. So I think we're in flux, and we're still trying to find some kind of equilibrium, because in the past, if you were leading very old school authoritarian, that was the dominant style, so there was no variety.
Right.
If you look at the context today, you'll see leadership where there's a lot of room for inclusion, diversity, a lot of areas that we look at as leaders. And those two are trying to coexist. So that's where we are. I see leadership in flux, whether it's government, whether it's companies, whether it's NGOs, civil society.
Right.
We're trying to find our feet in those spaces.
Interesting perspective. And so my next question is there any movement towards actually finding our feet and making either going in a direction that will then determine what kind of leadership Africans can be described to have. And is there any movement towards that direction? And if there is, what is it, and where exactly do you think we're going?
I'll take the word movement and split it into two.
Okay.
So movement in the context of a kind of evolution in a direction.
Right.
And I also look at movement as activism and movements, on the ground.
Right.
So in terms of movement as a evolution, I would say there's a shift that is going more and more towards, leadership has to empower others. You can't make all the decisions. You can't lead the way alone. You can't serve the people on your own.
Right.
And so you need to involve other people, etc. So there's a shift towards more inclusive leadership, more democratic leadership, more sensitive leadership. So there's a shift towards that. And in terms of movement as an action, I would look at two things. One, we're on a continent and in a time where there's so many leadership development programs. There's YALI, there's this fellowship, there's that fellowship. There's so many of them. We're yet to actually do research and measure the impact. So there's a movement that says, all right, in the past we presumed leaders were born. Now we're looking at leadership being something that is cultivated. And so you find more programs for training people, training young people especially, which is good, but also a little problematic if we leave it there and assume that just because you've gone through some leadership program, you're going to be a good leader. There's a certain level of self-awareness and building of your own capacity that won't come from just a program or just content. And then, if you look at movements in terms of activism and action on the road, on the streets, you also see that because of social media and because of the access to information, very ready access to information, you have citizens taking the lead, driving efforts. You find ordinary people beginning to feel empowered. If there's any structure that gets built around that, mobilizing people, and there's true leadership at the center of the mobilization, you will find that we're actually leveraging those movements. If you look at the Arab Spring, you'll notice that yes, there was a movement, yes, there was a lot going on. Was there a center, that was mobilizing and keeping all this together? Not really. No. And so it kind of dissipated into confusion, etc., etc. So I guess we've talked about the move towards more open, inclusive, leadership. And then in terms of movements, one direction in which leadership conversations are going is, train people, build their capacity, be intentional, which is good, but can be dangerous. And then also when you think of movements that have started, where people are taking leadership as citizens, if there's no central coordinating point and real leadership at the middle of all those movements, then they fall apart, generally.
Well, interesting. Actually, that is a precursor to the next bit of my question, which is about the skill set that we therefore require as African leaders to ensure that we become more relevant in our own situation, but also on the global scale as more leaders that are recognized. And so as you're talking about the center holding, I think then that means we need skills other than just knowledge from workshops. And what real skills do we need, maybe soft and hard?
Let me look at it along 3 levels. First level is just personally where you are as an individual. That's self-awareness. That's where the leadership gets birthed or born. If I'm to be a good leader, and I often say that leadership is not a choice. We tend to associate leadership with positions and titles and roles.
True.
But leadership is all about power and influence. If you hold a 4-month-old baby and you smile at them, they smile back at you. That's influence.
True.
So everybody has the capacity to influence anybody in their sphere, right? So I may not know you, I may be observing you from a distance and picking things from you and the way you live your life. You may never know.
That's a
right?
fair point, yeah.
So for me, leadership is thrust upon all of us, whether we like it or not. Right? It's thrust upon us, and the decision is how intentional do I want to be about my leadership?
Right.
Right? Do I want to be a good leader? Okay leader or a bad leader? So there's that self-awareness where you come to, whether you're a politician, whether you are a healthcare service provider, whether you are a retailer, it doesn't matter. Looking at yourself, assessing yourself, being aware of your gaps, your strengths. How can I leverage my strengths to be, somebody who is able to share a vision, mobilize people, to move along with me or to bring about change.
Right.
A leader, a good leader is somebody who's bringing about change in your own life, in your family, in your community, in your nation, and the world.
Right.
Just scaling up that way. So it starts with self.
That's with me.
Yes, self-awareness. That's one key thing.
Really clear.
And then I would move it beyond self to the group level. And when I say group, what are the skills that you need to engage with other people more effectively? What are the skills I need to engage with my family, my community, the people I work with? So outside of myself, and I don't think we can have a list that is comprehensive enough, but a few key skills would be communication. You may have great ideas as a leader, but if you can't share them effectively, then we have a problem.
Right.
There's authenticity. For me, that's very important. You have to be authentic. You find people who, in their engagement with other people, become people they are not.
Right.
Right? So they kind of transform themselves to be what other people expect. And they're not being themselves. And being authentic, wherever you are, whether it's at work, etc., that goes down to building all the other skills. For me, it's the foundation. If I'm authentic enough and I'm very self-aware.
It goes back to self-awareness.
Yes. And if I'm authentic, then I know that in this work we're doing, you're a stronger pair of hands than I am.
Yes.
And so I know when to step back and let other people step in the forefront and lead and direct. If I'm authentic, I communicate what I mean. And I don't just say things to please people.
Right.
We find a lot of our politicians on this continent doing that.
Unfortunately, very common.
So making promises that you can't keep, etc. And there's nothing wrong with making a promise and coming back and saying, you know what, I actually had good intentions and this was a promise I made, but I realize it's not going to happen or it'll happen later or whatever. You know, so being authentic and using that to build your skills and communicating with other people, being yourself, being open to learning, etc., etc. And then one skill is advocacy. So moving beyond self, community or group level to actually thinking at the national level. How can I, through my small efforts, bring about social change? What are the issues in my context that I can take seriously and actually begin to do something about, no matter where I am?
Yes.
It's not enough to complain that I go to the hospital and the nurses are rude, etc., etc. What can I do? It might be as little as going into the hospital, and if one nurse, for example, out of the lot is very friendly, etc., affirming her and letting her realize that, you know, you're doing a great job, and I appreciate the fact that you've actually been very courteous, whatever.
Yes.
Some may say, oh, that's what they're trained to do, so why go, you know,
they're just
hamper
doing their
them.
job.
Yes. But in affirming people, the others around them begin to realize, this makes a difference.
Yes.
You know, so figuring out here's a national problem. How can I contribute? You know, littering, sanitation, indiscipline on the roads, corruption.
Right. Community policing.
Yep.
Yes.
And I keep saying, I think a word that should be banned is corruption. Mainly because when we say corruption, it's just this big open word. But if you break it down, what is corruption? It's stealing, it's cheating, it's lying, it's being partial, it's being indisciplined on the roads.
Yes.
And so when you say corruption, we tend to link that to maybe some scandal you've seen, in the public domain. But if you look at yourself and you've broken corruption down beyond the big word to stealing, being partial, making decisions that are not fair, where there's no justice, you find corruption in yourself and in other people. So
Wow.
it's not enough to
Like
complain
that.
about the national problem.
Like that.
How do I begin to fix it with me? It means making a commitment that says, I am not bribing no matter what.
Right.
So I'm not giving anybody a bribe. That way, as I criticize, other people, I'm actually making the effort.
Right.
And I'm not just talking and then not doing. So engaging at that level of self-awareness, being authentic and learning how to engage with other people around you, and then thinking of how to make a difference. And as you make a difference at the national level, if you're doing a great job, that begins to go beyond borders, right? And go beyond borders doesn't mean necessarily a big platform, but being able to collaborate with others doing similar things across borders, and your work growing beyond you, so your influence in the work you're doing, the impact that you're achieving, going beyond borders. But ultimately, it's all about making change for self, for others, and for nation. Very important.
Wow. Lovely thoughts, and honestly speaking, I believe that our viewers will be happy to learn this from you. And let me say that if there are any final thoughts that you have, particularly building on the momentum that you've created, and building on the theme of the conference that we're just concluding, what would you like to share with our viewers, with the wider the public that hasn't been part of this conference, but that has had the opportunity to be part of this vlog or podcast?
Okay. So one of the key things that we talked about and focused on was the role of ICT. So information and communication technology.
Yes.
The role of ICT in civil societies, etc., how we manage them, and then the work that we actually do, whether it's advocacy, interventions, etc. And the two keywords I would leave your viewers with, one is creativity. To be able to leverage technology, you have to be creative. You have to realize, I can do it this way, manually, or I can do it this way, it'll be slow or it'll be inefficient. But if I engage technology, I can bring my creativity to the table. And I can think of leveraging more people on whatever project I'm working on, more ideas. There's the social media. There's just not even social media, but plain access to information through the internet. Whether there's a news site, etc. Leverage those things. Be creative in where you are learning from, and how you're using that information. And be open. So
which
be
is freely
creative.
available.
Exactly. Be creative enough to draw on technology. Don't get scared. People get scared. Oh my goodness, my job is going to be taken over by technology. It's going to be automated and I'll be no longer needed. But identify, there are certain things that no machine can do.
Absolutely.
No machine can do. And so that human communication, interaction, that we all need at some point will always have to be there. And so figure out, how can I leverage technology to do the things that technology can do better?
Yes.
And what are the areas where we've actually not even paid enough attention, where we need more of a human touch, human connection, gathering information and body language, looking at somebody, beginning to understand what they're thinking, what they're saying, how their body is reacting, etc., etc.
Yes.
Robots may pick some of those things, but so be creative and be open. Open to learning, open to identifying different people you can collaborate with, identifying multiple sources of information, reading, learning. Just being open to taking in a lot and then letting it come back out in terms of your creativity and the work that you do. Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. I must say thank you so much. We have learned so much in a short time. Thank you for participating. Thank you for sharing your valuable views. And just to say that this is, of course, like I shared with you earlier, we're going to be able to broadcast it on our YouTube channel, which is the FLAGSHIP series vlog.
Okay.
We'll also extract the audio and share it on a podcast, which is a flagship series podcast.
Okay.
And so that it's open to the viewership from the public to learn from this wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
We thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
All right.